All right, so now this video has been on my to-do list for a while now, and although the content is pretty much irrelevant in the gaming space, I wanted to finally get this out as a way of clearing out the checklist, if you will. I was supposed to say checklist, if you will. Kind of like if you ever play a RPG or something like that, you got that level 1 quest that you're just like, let me go back and do this even though I'm like level 100 just to clear out the list of things to do. So we're gonna do a little travel back in time to earlier, set the tone, the mood, or whatever of the video, and let's hop into it. The month of June was packed full of stuff. We got the Stellar Blade PC port.
Hey, yo, what the fuck?
The Nikkei collab.
Nice.
A wave of Summer Game Fest announcements, the new Xbox collab with ROG, Death Stranding 2, and the wild psychological trailer that had me hyped until it turned out to be Black Ops 7. And a little bit of a side tangent, the Summer Game Show with Xbox, and then the Game Awards earlier this month, and that big final reveal, and each big final reveal had me super disappointed. But back on topic, before of all of that, just in May, while everyone else was checking out Elden Ring Night Rain and raving about Cammy's cake in Monster Hunter Wilds, you see what I did there, I was playing Dauntless right before it officially shut down, wanting to get an idea of what it had to offer and whether or not there was anything still worth exploring as a free-to-play alternative to Monster Hunter. I had dabbled in Dauntless a few years ago, more in the earlier days. I remember played it on the Switch when I was at work instead of working. And so this wasn't my first time playing the game. But after being away for so long, I was curious whether the final update, The Awakening that was released back in December of last year, brought any meaningful changes or additions. Now, before we talk about what it was like to play the game in its final days, I do want to take a brief moment to go over the history of the game, as well as the studio behind it, because obviously you want to ask, how did the game eventually get to the point that they were shutting down? So let's go a little backstory of Phoenix Labs and the early days of Dauntless and how we got to where we are. Dauntless launched in early access in 2018 with a full release a year later. It was developed by Phoenix Labs, a studio formed by former devs from Riot, BioWare, and Capcom. You played as a slayer, hunting down massive creatures known as Behemoths. This is me trying to be like my narrator advertisement voice guy. But anyway, called massive creatures called Behemoths across floating islands in a world powered by and wrecked by ether. Is it Ether? I always mix those up. It aims to be a more approachable, free-to-play take on Monster Hunter with fast-paced hunts and stylized visuals from the environments to the monsters. And some of the Behemoths, they have some pretty cool designs. We kind of touched on that later in the video. The game built solid momentum early on thanks to its cross-platform play and accessible combat, but over time, content slowed and its player base shrank, especially with Monster Hunter still dominating the genre. We got Monster Hunter World, we later got Monster Hunter Rise, so Dauntless had some really stiff competition. In 2023, Phoenix Labs was acquired by a blockchain company, and things just went downhill from there. Layoffs, canceled projects, and a final update in 2024, The Awakening, which reset player progress and added new microtransactions to the game. And again, I will expand on those microtransactions because they kind of suck. The shutdown was announced in February of this year, and in May 2025, Dauntless officially went offline. So with that little history lesson out of the way, what was it like coming back to Dauntless in 2025? Well, for starters, upon opening the game, you're greeted by a title screen with a very epic and bombastic theme. And this is where I cut away to the song playing, da 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 da, and probably cut midway of me saying this is where loading in, you guide it through the onboarding process. Talk to some NPCs, visit the training area to try out different weapons, then head out and bully a low tier behemoth as a warm-up. From there, the core loop kicks in. Level your gear, take on stronger monsters, unlock more activities, take on stronger behemoths, and so on. It's a simple, straightforward process, and as someone who's been away from the game for a extremely long time, I appreciated how easy it was just to hop into the game and get to playing. One thing to note, while I did have my old armor set equipped, the previous weapons I had were all gone, as I mentioned earlier in the video, and in their place were a preset of weapons, courtesy of the Awakening update. Now, I will go into details further as to what the updates brought and the fan response for that, but let's move on to the next section. Now, like with any game, the main thing that makes or breaks a game is the gameplay. So the key question here is, did I enjoy playing Dauntless? For the most part, I did. Yes, I did. The combat felt fluid and it was very easy to pick up. Each of the 7 core weapon classes had their own mechanics and combos, and with the Awakening update, each unique weapon in a class came with its own passive and special attack options. Weapons also had elemental affinities that apply status effects during fights, such as shocking enemies to stun them or using frost to slow them down. And since there's no guard mechanic or anything like that in Dauntless, the game leaned heavily into dodging, using attacks that had super armor and well-timed interrupted attacks to turn the tide of the fight. So you could hit a monster at the right time when he's glowing and maybe knock him over. There's like a shadow creature that's like jumping through portals, and if you smack him in the face, you're like, stop, bro, just stop. Now, while I did enjoy the feel of the combat overall, one of the issues I had was that the weapon variety didn't always click with me. They had their different mechanics by switching between them, but it didn't always feel as impactful as I hoped. With the hammer, you had the option to shoot projectiles, as well as do this Gears of War animation. When your minigame reload animation after you fire projectiles, you were also able to string in attacks and power up your final strikes, or some of the strikes in between, shoot off shots in the middle of it and dash around the map at the same time. And then you had the axe that you could throw, as well as charge, and you're still able to be mobile while you're charging. Throw the axe, pick it up, and now you've improved the damage. There were twin blades that you could use to do like some really cool ninja stuffs. You had some gauntlets that could shoot like laser beams, and gauntlets and kung fu. I don't know what I'm trying to say. And some pistols. You always got to pull the pistol out. Okay, you got man over here fighting with the sword and actually just like gun. This gun. That's all you need. But even with that being said, I don't know, it felt, like I said, this swapping between the two just didn't feel as impactful. You know, in Monster Hunter, swapping from a hammer to a greatsword or a charge blade to dual blade completely changes your rhythm of how you play the game. And Dauntless swapping felt like more like adjusting the play speed of my character and less so about the core style of actually using a weapon. Now, again, every weapon had its unique mechanics that you had to fish for and different combos that they had applied to them, but still this didn't feel as impactful going from one weapon to another. Though, to be fair, maybe I'm just bad at the game, and maybe the experts out there that know iframes and all these other techniques would know a bit more when it comes to the overall uniqueness of each weapon, how it really shapes the different play of the game of using the weapons. Now, overall, the weapons were still great to use and never felt like I was actually fighting the game to use the weapons or anything like that. And alongside the weapons, you had items such as tonics, buffs, and pylons, grenades to help enhance your Slayer and assist you when fighting the Behemoths. Now, again, as I said, with the Awakening update, they did add the ability to give weapons special effects. So there were passive abilities as well as like ultimate attacks that you could do with each weapon. So it was kind of neat, and again, we'll talk more about this in later sections, but acquiring the weapons to do the unique cool stuff, you know, as a Monster Hunter inspired game, you would think, you know, fight the Behemoths, get the parts, make a new weapon. But with the Awakening update, it changed to drop money to get new weapons. Now, granted, there were trees that you could upgrade within the weapons you got, and so you have to use like actual monster parts to improve the weapon itself. But when it came to crafting the weapon itself, you had to go to the shop and buy the weapon and do that. And that, again, for a Monster Hunter game, it's not a good thing. You can still craft armor, but you got to buy the weapons. So again, to their credits, the weapons had unique stuff to them, but kind of takes away from the actual loop and enjoyment of playing the game. But with all that being said, of course, none of that matters without something worth fighting. So let's talk Behemoths. Behemoths. Battling these creatures were the central focus of Dauntless, so let's start with the discussion around their designs. And just to say this now, I might mispronounce some of the names because I'm terrible at pronouncing their names. So to start, there's a turtle like Skarn, and I'm not going to go over the full list too, I'm just naming some of them. So if people are like, yeah, you like name 4 of them, well, I'm not going through the whole list. Anyway, there's a turtle like Skarn, a terror behemoth covered in shifting rock formations and a thick stone layer of armor. Boreas, a ice behemoth, encases itself in frost once enraged and summons minions through psionic communication. And that's a little interesting thing that I learned going through the wiki. They probably described it in the game as well, but you know, just reading things through the wiki here. Drask, an electric lizard, since the game is available, Drask, an electric lizard that fires lasers from his mouth. Volumir, a giant radiant beetle, puts on a spectacular disco light show before vaporizing you. And then you have Riftstalker, the 4-legged bat-eared trister that will cross your ankles using its teleporting umbral ether. And lastly, the myth, the legend, Emberbane, this fire dog. Yeah. Now, what I liked about these creatures is the creative use of their elements. As mentioned, the Riftstalker uses umbral rifts to maneuver through the battlefield, but would also drag you into the Shadow Realm and still cross you up and jump through portals and do this crazy stuff using the umbral energy, or ether, if you will. Another radiant creature, the lightbound Kokoto, I told you I mispronounced these names, would trap you in a cage before blasting you with a radiant beam of light. And then Stormclaw would trap you in a cage of lightning before running circles around you. The game had a pretty good roster of behemoths to fight, or at least the bit that I got to play, including elemental variants of creatures such as, again, like Kokoto. I probably pronounced that thing differently twice now, being a radiant variant of Kokoto, which is originally a terror behemoth. So again, one of the highlights of playing the game was how creative some of the fights were in terms of how the behemoths would utilize their elemental ether that they embody. Again, looking at Riftstalker and how he would jump between portals and he would have his own shadow realm that he would pull you into. And some of the radiant creatures would utilize the light to trap you in there using spheres of lasers and all that crazy stuff going on. And so it's a bit of a shame that I didn't get to experience fighting tougher creatures in a given element, just to see how much they would push that level of creativity the further you played the game. And one of the key things that kind of kept me from wanting to put more time into the game, at least the time that I had before the game shut down, is the designs and systems that were in play when it came to actually leveling up and improving your character. Cue the transition to the next chapter, because I don't know how to close out this section. So to start, let's discuss the weapon leveling system. So instead of being similar to Monster Hunter, where your gear improved by taking materials from slain monsters, which is how the game used to be to my understanding, Dauntless weapon progression was tied to weapon XP, which could be earned in a variety of ways. Firstly, by using the weapon in Hunt. Now, even when you had your weapon in the secondary slot, I believe you still earn XP. I probably should mention it early on in the video that you could carry 2 weapons in Dauntless, so that was kind of cool, I suppose. So you could swap on the fly more so than what you could do in Monster and Wilds, where you gotta get your secret. I'm going off topic, but hunting helped you earn XP for your weapons. And the issue that I did find myself running into is that I got to the point where I was almost too strong for a hunt, where you will earn almost no XP, if not any altogether, or I was at the point where I'm weak enough to where I'm earning XP, but it was a very uphill battle because of a variety of things, which I will touch on later. The next way that you could earn XP is by doing quests and bounties. Now, bounties consisted of a variety of challenges ranging from hunting X behemoth type with a certain amount of time, so hunt X amount of fire behemoths, terra or lightning behemoths, or use a weapon for X amount of hunts, or combat challenges like scoring X amount of interruptions or dealing X amount of damage without taking damage yourself. The issue I had here was that I almost felt counterintuitive in some of the bounties that you were giving us. So for example, I got a bounty that said use a sword, but my sword is level 1 compared to my level 10 hammer, and it wouldn't really make sense for me to use my sword unless I want to go and farm low level behemoths, because I'm not about to take my level 1 weapon to go fight that's level 20, even though I don't want this. Yeah, anyway, so now since you could still carry 2 weapons, thankfully carrying like a sword as your secondary, even if you don't use it, will still count as completion or progress towards that bounty. The only thing is with that part is that it kind of felt like the devs were openly acknowledging like, hey, yeah, you know, the system may not be the best, so here's a workaround. So it's like, on one hand, I'm like, this is kind of dumb, but on the other hand, like, thanks for providing me ways to get around the system. But at the same time, it's like, are you guys kind of acknowledging that this is stupid as well? I don't know. Now, the next option that you could do when it came to upgrading your gear was using this material called Aetherite, which could be obtained through quests, bounties, daily, and weekly missions, and it came in 3 tiers: dull, shiny, and peerless. Now, one thing I want to make sure I'm not saying is that it's different from Monster Hunter, so the system is bad, but it would have been nice to be able to use monster parts to put towards leveling the weapon, as I mentioned before. Yes, you can put parts to weapons to level. They're like passives as well as I think they're ultimates that were introduced with the Awakening update. But having another source to upgrade the weapon itself, the level of the weapon itself, which is tied to progressing the story and unlocking the missions, it would have been nice to be able to use the parts that you earn from fighting a monster and put that into the weapon level. Similar to how with Monster Hunter, you can take your monster parts that you've gotten throughout your hunts, and after you have enough points, you can merge those together into different armor spheres. And then taking those armor spheres, you can improve the defense of your armor, and now you're using the material you earn from a hunt to help you with your future hunts. And I saw a post of a guy like, oh man, I'm getting destroyed by Mazios, what's going on? And I'm like, you know, that 340 armor defense probably isn't doing you any favors. So it's yeah, it's one thing that really made the system annoying too, just the overall weapon system as well as the Aetherite, is that with you juggling this limited resource, the Aetherite, you come to a point where you're kind of forced in a sense to stick to one weapon as you're progressing the campaign. So because I was pretty much leveling my hammer up, because your quest and mission is tied, or unlocks is tied to your character level, which is essentially your weapon level. So let me rephrase that. Your weapon level is your character level, essentially. You know, I found myself in hunts where I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to focus on one weapon, the hammer, in my case, and just use that to help me progress through the game and get through up to unlocking new missions. The problem there is that, for one, I like to experiment with different weapons. And with Monster Hunter, if I'm using the switch axe, but then I'm like, I feel like using the gun lance. And, well, if I swap weapons, I can just use some materials I've gained from the previous hunts with my switch axe and just bring my gun lance up to the tier I need it to be so I could do newer hunts with it. In Dauntless, it's like, oh, well, I want to swap to my sword, but I spent all my Aetherite on my hammer. So I'm either stuck doing bounties to try to level up my sword, or I had to decide to spend Aetherite on my sword, which then takes away from my hammer, which I need to level up to do new quests. So again, I was kind of just like in a position to where like, I guess I'm just going to use the hammer. And it sucks here too, because matching elements to a Behemoth is pretty important when it comes to improving your odds of winning. Now, granted, the bonuses aren't too drastic, I don't think, at least at the levels I was operating at. But still, the game is kind of forcing you to play unoptimally because, I don't know if that's even a word properly, but because you're limited on resources. And that takes me to my next thing, weapon acquisition. With the Awakening update, weapons were no longer tied to crafting via monster parts. You could only acquire weapons through the store. So I had a Thunder Axe, or Thunder Hammer rather, and if I wanted a Fire Hammer, I would have to go to the store and buy it with real world money. Now, they did give you weapon tokens that you could use to buy the weapons, I believe through the season pass, the free tier, and possibly the paid tier. I think the paid tier had like a weapon you could get as well. But one of the key things about hunting games such as Monster Hunter, such as Wild Hearts, just to reference that, is fighting the monster, take the parts that you got from the monster, put it into your gear, armor, weapons, and going out to fight stronger monsters. And you take the core thing of that loop and put it behind a store. It really ruins the experience in that regards. So, and it got to the point, so with the Aetherite system, the XP system, the acquisition of weapons, it got to the point where it became, I want to say, a hassle to play the game, or just not as fun to play, right? I'm already being limited on what I can use. Now I'm being limited on how I can get my gear lowered so I can do newer activities. And I haven't talked about the sell system. Now, granted, well, let me walk it back. The sell system. So this is essentially, to my understanding, the equivalent of Monster Hunter and decorations. So you can slide in skills into your armor to give you new perks bonuses. The issue I had was that is cells are one-time use items. Now, I will say, and I will completely admit, if it's like a early on issue because you haven't played enough to have the resources, to where, okay, the sales system may not be as bad if I put more time into it because the game probably eventually gives you enough currency that you can craft and not have to worry about it. I understand that. But when it comes to how they decide to do the weapon leveling as well as weapon acquisition, I don't think that's something that would have gotten better the more you played. So essentially where I want to close with the system section of the video is when you're, how can I put it? The game was already on rough times, right? And so one thing you want to do is have better player retention or bring in more revenue. That's probably why they put the weapons where they are. But you want player retention because if the player's there and the game's great, maybe they're willing to drop a few bucks. But when you have systems in place that makes a player want to say, you know what, I don't think it's really respecting my time, so I'm just going to go somewhere else. You lose that potential player and you lose that potential customer as well. So again, I understand all these changes were mostly introduced on the Awakening update, so they were probably doing these changes to be like, we need a way to recoup costs as best as we can. But you kind of did the opposite here, and I would give credit where credit is due, you know, and correct me if I'm wrong, the people who play Center, but having the unique abilities for weapons did give them more character, which was great. But again, if you have systems in place that make me not want to play the game, because that's what happened, I was like, I don't want to play this game. Like, I'm out of Aetheryte, so I can't really level up my character and progress the story at the pace I want. And then if I fight a Behemoth that's lightning, but my only weapon is lightning, now I'm forced to fight with the wrong element, right? And I can't switch to, I think Terra weapons were good against lightning. I can't switch to my Terra staff or pike, because it's like level 5 and I'm level 20. So I'm gonna end the rambling here on the systems section. I recorded a section that's probably like almost double the length here, so I'm gonna move over to the closing section of the video now. I lied, and I probably mentioned this earlier in a different section. I kind of recorded these separately, but with the Awakening update, they essentially removed all your weapons and gave you the newer ones. So to my understanding, everyone was starting from level 1 essentially, and all the gear that you worked to level up and get tossed out the window. And while they did give you an element for every, or a weapon for every element, so theoretically, you know, if you needed to fight a ice behemoth, you had a fire weapon. But as I said, you still got to level up that weapon, and you're still fighting for resources. You're still fighting for XP. That's not the fastest to level up your gear. So it was all in all just a crappy situation overall. So now we're going to transition to the closing section. All right, so that brings us to the closing of this video, and I want to go back to the start of the question I posed at the start of the video. Do I think Dauntless could have been a good free-to-play alternative in 2025? And my answer to that is maybe. I don't know, because I didn't play a lot. I didn't go further into the end game because the server shut down before I could even level up further into the game. But I did have fun playing the game. I will say that, like, I did enjoy the moment-to-moment combat, the music, the Behemoth designs, like those were all great aspects of the game. But as I said, what took me out of the experience were the systems around leveling up your character to unlock new activities and progress the story. Again, weapon levels tied to Aetheryte and XP that can vary at the amount that you acquire in terms of the XP based off of what you're fighting, your level, makes you kind of eventually hit a very slow crawl of leveling your gear. And then when it comes to Aetheryte, you know, same thing, you're limited to X amount of Aetheryte at a time. And if you're trying to use, you know, your lightning hammer, or I keep referencing lightning hammer, but if you're sticking to one weapon to progress the story, you eventually get into a point where you're stuck using the wrong element to fight a behemoth because you spent all your resources on that one weapon. So it's like, well, you could either get more Aetheryte. I think you might have been able to buy some. I'm not about to buy Aetheryte, you know, or you can level up your sword. I'm not about to go back 5 levels, 10 levels to level up my sword so I can bring it up to match the behemoth down fighting. And I referenced that in Monster Hunter, I could easily swap weapons and go to a different weapon using the materials I got from a previous hunt. But sure, you could say, well, sometimes maybe you need that one low tier claw from a monster. The difference here is that you can get the claw within a hunt or two, right? Whereas here, if you want to load your weapon based off of XP alone, you're going to be doing that for a very long time. And then if you're trying to get Aetherite, like say if you're out of bounties, if you're out of bounties too, because even the bounty system was you had bounty tokens. So eventually you just ran out of tokens and you couldn't get bounties anymore. So what I'm saying is the gameplay was great. What took me out of the experience, as I said before, was the systems. And so I can't confidently say it would have been a great free-to-play alternative in Monster Hunter in terms of the longevity and just respecting the player's time. And one thing to note as well is that if you didn't want to have a free-to-play Monster Hunter experience, I know where I'm leading with this, I probably said it wrong, but there are cheaper alternatives to Monster Hunter Wilds, right? You can get World, if you never played World. You can get Rise, you can get Wild Hearts. I'm sure you can find those on deals. If not, buy them through Game Pass or get like EA Play. So there are cheaper ways to get a Hunter game experience without getting Wilds. So ultimately for Dauntless, you know, it's a shame what happened to the game because it's been active for so long, but you know, you can only go on for so long, I suppose. So with all that being said, if you made it to the end of this video, thanks for watching. Comment down below if you tried Dauntless before it shut down, or if you're a long-time veteran of the franchise. Well, I say franchise, of the game, and just your thoughts on what it was like to play the game for so long, especially if you're like a day one player and just to see the updates and what good and bad was introduced with the updates and what eventually led to the downfall of the game. So I suppose RIP Dauntless, and Moira, your abs of steel will be missed. That's the end of the video.